If you're learning Python and only following tutorials, this video might save you months of frustration. These are 5 mistakes beginners make in real Python project, not in tutorials, not in LeetCode, but at real work. Hey there, I am Manuel. I work with Python in real data and backend project. And in this channel, I will share how Python is actually used in real life. Not just in how pass an exercise, but how you will work with Python in real life. So let's get into the first mistake. Mistake number 1, writing everything in one function. Beginners love to write one big function that does everything. Read data, clean data, process data, print the result, all in one place. This worked for small scripts, but in real projects, this became impossible to debug, to test, to reuse. So how can we solve this in a real project? Here I have a very simple example of what I've been just telling you about. This is a little script that create a function that read the data, clean the data, and process the data. We want the users that have age over 18 years old. So if you were a beginner, you will try to create a function that do every single one of these functions for you, and at the end you will print the users. If we run this, you will see that in fact he returns a list of users that has more than 18 years old. If we can here, we see that he didn't return Manuel Medina because he's 11, not James Wilson, not Elijah Harris. None of that will be here because he's less than 18 years old. If we change, so we can test here, we change for less than, we will see all those names appear. Okay, we will have Manuel Medina, we have Shane Wilson, Oliver, Elijah Harris, and so on. But as we mentioned, this is wrong because we are doing all the logic inside one big function. What about if this cleaning data fails? What about if this process fails? The whole process user will fail. This is not the proper way to do it. How it will be in a real Python project? Okay, let's see the example number 2 that we have here. The whole idea is to break your function in little block of codes. For example, we will have a little block, a little function for read the user. We will have another little block so we can clean the user. We will have a filter function. And then in the main function, the only thing that we have to do is call up all these little blocks to do the function for us. This could like have it in another script. You can import it from another library, but you won't depend on exactly these functions in case you want to change everything in your main. So the main idea is that real Python is about focus function, small function. There is a saying that if you can explain what your function does in one sentence, it's because your function is doing too many things. So you have to try to describe the functionality of your function in one sentence. And always remember, long functions do not mean smart code. This means future problems. Mistake number 2, using clever trick instead of clear code. This one is very common when people come from tutorials or LeetCode. You write a one-line code that looks smart, but at the end, nobody understands it. That's a problem. And for example, you create a very complex list comprehension or something like that, and it will be very, very complicated for your coworkers to read. And that's not what you want. In real project, readability beats cleverness. Always. Your code is read way more times than is written. So you have to remember, somebody will read your code after you're done with it, because maybe in the future, somebody will want to create a new feature and they will want to use your code or something like that, and they will be reading your code more times than it took you to write it. So this is something that you have to keep in mind. If your junior teammate cannot understand your code in 30 seconds, it's probably is that your code is too clever. You have to always remember that. You have to try to your code has to be easy to read to everybody in your team. Here's an example of our previous scenario when we were filtering the users. Remember that we have a very long comprehension list here, and that was in this case it was easy to read, but in some scenarios it will be difficult. The best way to do it, in my opinion, is try to split it, like try to tell a history with your code. For example, here I separate the get age that we have inside the list comprehension into a new function to get age function, because maybe in the future we need to get the age differently, and the only thing that we have to do is change this function here, and we don't have to change the entire list comprehension that we have created. The other thing that I did was remove the list comprehension and create a simple for loop. In this case, it will be way much easy to read. Here we can do some work to improve legibility. For example, here this line does split in the first position. We also could separate that to be more specific, but I think it will be necessary in this case. So this is how you prioritize legibility over smart code. The takeaway of this second mistake is always remember, Python is not about showing how smart you are. It's about being clear with what you want to do. And with that, we are going to the mistake number 3, is ignoring edge cases. Okay, as beginners, we usually code for the happy path. What I mean for the happy path, we only input the right data. Always, if we are expecting a list, we always put data on the list. If we are reading from the file, we always read from the file that is already filled with data and all that stuff. So there will be no errors that came across our programming experience, because we always program for the happy path. But in real world, data is very, very messy. In the real world, we always have like missing data, dates that are in different format, that real user break things. Program is expecting a PDF and the user make like an image as input, something like that. And it's very, very tricky. For example, let's imagine that we have here a user with 24,000 years old. We do this, you will see it's Noah Jackson. We do this, and we run it. We will see that Noah Jackson will be still appearing here in our function. Why? Because even though there's no possible way that a human have 2400 years, our function is not validating that this is a real user. We are only validating that the user have more than 18 years old, and that's not proper for a good application. You have to validate every edge case. You have to, if you are doing like valid users, you need to validate that the user is more than 18 years old, but is not more than 120, for example. And that is a very high number. I would say more than 90 years old, something like that, depending on what you're creating, what you're developing. So to solve this, always ask yourself, what if the input is empty? What about if the input is none? What if the program fails? Handling these edge cases is what separates tutorial code from production code, because in production, everything that could fail will fail. Because remember, real bugs live in these cases that you didn't think about. And the user, believe me, they will always find a way to break your code. And with this, we're going to mistake number 4. The mistake number 4 is not give visibility to your code. For example, not logging at all and only do prints. Like in this case, we are printing the adults. We don't know anything that what happened in between these lines. For example, a beginner will say, okay, I want to see the lines in this function, so I will print the lines here or something like that. And that's not the way we do things in production. In production, we always do logging. Why? Because you never see an application and you never see in the screen of your application like, okay, we are resolving this thing in the backend, we are resolving this other thing in the backend. No, you never see any of that in your application. So the way we do that is using logins, because this log will be printed, but it will be printed into the server. To the programmer will be the only one who be able to see if anything goes wrong with your application, and the end user doesn't have to see this stuff. So what I'm trying to say here is like, print is fine when you are learning how to code, when you want to see how the variables are in every step of your function. But in real project, print is useless because you will not get access to those prints. When something breaks in production, nobody is there watching your terminal. So you need logs, clear message, context. Like for example, here we break, but why we break? What was the error? When the error occurred? All that stuff needs to be inside your logs. Because remember, if your project have no logs, it's like being blind. If your project fails, you won't be able to know where the project broke and why. This is the main reason. So remember, if your project has no log, it's blind. And finally, mistake number 5. The mistake number 5 that I usually make, and I was made it until very recently, is not thinking about the next developer. This is very, very common. What I mean by that, beginners code only for themselves. For example, in this scenario, some beginners will say I here. For example, will create a variable I, and it will put that variable here, and it will say I, and because it's a for loop, the way we learn for loop is from I to something, or from I in every line, and we will go through every line. This is a very simple scenario, but just to exemplify, clarify my point. Imagine your code broke and it's 3 a.m. and the next developer is on call and he awakes at 3 a.m. and he tries to read your code. He will say, okay, for I in line, what the hell is I? Why he mentioned here this is I? I don't know what I means, what I'm trying to do here. So he have to try to figure out first what I means in order to continue to debug your project. So my recommendation is try to think about good variable names. This is the case. Here if you don't want to use I, you have to, for example, put something that makes sense. You have to create simple structure. For example, here we separate our long comprehension list into a more simple structure to read. You have to make clear intent of what your code means. So the next person who read the code know why are you doing that in that specific place and why you are doing it in that specific way. So he can know what you are doing and why you are doing it. And at the end, that is what makes you valuable in a real project because people can rely on your code. So the takeaway of this mistake is thinking your code as a message to the next developer. You're not coding for yourself. You're coding for something much bigger than you, and you have to think that other programmers will read your code, and you have to think that you are leaving a message for him to read. Okay, so think about that. Okay, that's it. So let's make a quick recap. So what are the 5 mistakes that every beginners make? So the first one is create big function with everything inside. The second one was clever but unreadable code that nobody can understand other than him. The third one is ignoring edge case. Like, for example, what if the list is empty? What if it's none? What if it breaks? Something like that. The fourth mistake is using way too much print and not logging. So your code will be blind, remember? And the last one is coding for yourself. If you try to solve these 5 mistakes, I'm sure you will not be considered more a beginner at your work. So this is it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I definitely enjoy making it for you. And if you have any comment, please leave it down below. And hope to see you in the next video. Bye.